ladies and emperors, I just got back from Venice, and boy, are my arms tired.
There are very few people left in Hollywood who can say exactly what they think without worrying about the consequences. Mel Brooks is one of them. At 98 years old, the man who gave us Blazing Saddles, Young Frankenstein, Spaceballs, and some of the most gloriously unhinged comedies in cinema history has reached the age where honesty isn't just permitted, it's mandatory. He has earned every single word he says, and he says them without apology. So when Mel Brooks recently opened up about the actors he claimed to have hated working with over his legendary career, people listened. They laughed. They nodded. And then they thought about it more carefully, because with Mel Brooks, nothing is quite as simple as it sounds. His version of hate is not the cold, bitter kind. It's the kind that lives right next door to deep, complicated admiration. It's the kind of hatred you reserve for people who pushed you further than you wanted to go and made you better for it, whether you liked it or not. The 6 names he mentioned form a who's who of Hollywood royalty. Some of them were his closest friends. One of them was his wife. All of them drove him absolutely out of his mind. And all of them, in their own chaotic, brilliant, maddening ways, helped make Mel Brooks the filmmaker he became. This is not a simple list. It is a proper look at the relationships behind the camera. The arguments, the laughter, the impossible standards, and the moments of pure creative magic that could only have come from friction. Because great comedy, it turns out, rarely comes from a smooth and peaceful place. If you want to understand Mel Brooks' relationship with Dom DeLuise, you need to understand one fundamental truth. Dom DeLuise could not stop laughing. Not occasionally. Not when something was especially funny. Always. Constantly. Helplessly. On set, off set, between takes, during takes, sometimes before the cameras even started rolling. Dom DeLuise was a one-man laughing machine, and while that sounds like a wonderful quality in a human being, it is an absolute catastrophe if you are the director trying to get a movie made. Mel Brooks worked with Dom across several of his films, including Silent Movie, History of the World Part 1, Spaceballs, and Robin Hood, Men in Tights. Every single time, the same pattern played out. Mel would set up the shot. The crew would be ready. The actors would be in position. Someone would make a slightly funny face, or deliver a line with a little extra flair, or simply exist in Dom's line of vision, and that would be it. Dom would collapse. His entire body would shake. His face would turn red. He would cover his eyes, wave his hands, try desperately to pull himself together, and then completely fail to do so. The take was ruined. Again. Mel would call cut. The crew would wait. Dom would gradually stop laughing, catch his breath, compose himself, look serious, and then the moment Mel called action, someone would blink wrong and Dom would be gone again. What made it particularly maddening was that Dom wasn't even laughing at his own material. He was laughing at everyone else. Put him next to Harvey Korman and he was finished before the scene began. Put him anywhere near Madeline Kahn and the whole day could be written off. Dom had an almost supernatural sensitivity to other people's comedy. He couldn't watch someone else be funny without physically collapsing under the weight of his own delight. It was charming, generous, and deeply, deeply inconvenient. Mel adapted over time. He started blocking scenes so Dom wouldn't be facing the other actors directly. He positioned cameras to catch Dom in the brief windows between laughing fits. He learned to treat every successful clean take as a minor miracle. None of this was in the director's handbook. None of it should have been necessary. And yet, when those clean takes came, and they always came eventually, Dom DeLuise was extraordinary. His timing was immaculate. His physical comedy was effortless. His warmth radiated off the screen in a way that no amount of technical direction could manufacture. He was the kind of performer who made audiences feel like they were watching a close friend having the time of their life, and that feeling was completely genuine because Dom genuinely was having the time of his life. Every single moment, whether Mel wanted him to or not. Off the set, Dom was the heart of every production he was part of. He cooked for the crew. He remembered everyone's names. He turned working days into something that felt more like a family gathering than a professional obligation. Mel would complain loudly and regularly about how many takes Dom had cost him, and then he would cast him again in the next movie. Because the truth was impossible to deny. Dom DeLuise made every production harder and every finished film better. His laughter was a tax, and the results were worth every penny. Mel says he hated working with Dom. What he means is that he loved him completely and found the whole thing absolutely exhausting. That's a very Mel Brooks kind of hatred. Madeline Kahn was, by any measure, one of the most gifted comic actresses who ever lived. Mel Brooks knew this the first time he worked with her, and it didn't make things easier. If anything, it made things significantly harder, because Madeline Kahn combined extraordinary talent with an equally extraordinary refusal to accept anything less than perfection. From herself, from her costumes, from her co-stars, and from Mel himself. She appeared in Blazing Saddles, Young Frankenstein, High Anxiety, and History of the World Part 1. In each film, she created something unforgettable. Her performance as Lily Von Shtupp in Blazing Saddles alone would have secured her place in comedy history. But the journey from first rehearsal to final cut was rarely straightforward when Madeline was involved. She questioned everything. Not in an obstructionist way, but in the way of someone who genuinely could not move forward until she understood precisely why a scene was written the way it was, why her character would make a particular choice, and whether the dialogue truly served the moment or was simply filling space. These are not unreasonable questions. They are, in fact, exactly the questions a serious actress should ask. The problem was that Mel Brooks operated at a speed that did not naturally accommodate philosophical inquiry between setups. She arrived late. Not dramatically late, not with grand apologies or explanations. Just late, with the calm certainty of someone who had decided the work would begin when she was ready and not a moment before. The crew would be waiting. The cameras would be positioned. Mel would be pacing. And Madeline would walk in, settle herself, and begin, because she was ready now, and that was what mattered. There is a well-known story from the making of Blazing Saddles where Madeline requested rewrites of several of her lines because they did not reflect how the character would actually speak. Mel, who had been working on the script with a room full of writers for months, was not thrilled. He argued. She was patient but immovable. The lines were rewritten. The scene was shot. And Madeline was, infuriatingly, correct. The new version was better. That pattern repeated throughout their entire working relationship. Mel would plan something. Madeline would find a problem with it. They would argue. Eventually one of them would concede. And the finished scene would be better than either version they had started with. It was exhausting, time-consuming, and frequently frustrating. It also produced brilliant results. Mel understood this. Understanding it did not make him enjoy it anymore. He kept casting her anyway. That is the whole argument right there. A director who truly hated an actress does not put her in 4 films. Mel kept casting Madeline Kahn because he knew, on some level that transcended the daily frustrations, that she made him better. She made the work better. And she did it without ever being anything other than completely, uncompromisingly herself. Gene Hackman only appeared in one Mel Brooks film. It was a small role, a cameo almost, and it resulted in one of the most beloved sequences in the entire Mel Brooks catalog. The blind hermit scene in Young Frankenstein is a masterpiece of physical comedy and terrible timing, and Gene Hackman plays it with such committed, deadpan sincerity that audiences have been quoting it for 50 years. None of this means the experience was enjoyable for Mel Brooks. The problem was straightforward. Gene Hackman was a dramatic actor, not just professionally, but constitutionally. He had won an Oscar. He had built a career on intensity and psychological realism. He approached every role, including a small comic cameo in a black-and-white parody, with the full weight of his craft and a complete intolerance for the kind of looseness that defined a Mel Brooks set. Mel ran his productions like organized chaos. He wanted energy. He wanted surprise. He loved it when an actor tried something unexpected between takes and accidentally discovered something funnier than what was scripted. Hackman did not want happy accidents. Hackman wanted the scene to be what it was in rehearsal, executed cleanly and professionally. When other actors dissolved into laughter between takes, which on a Mel Brooks set was essentially constant, Hackman stayed in focus, waiting with quiet professional patience for everyone else to collect themselves. Mel described the look Hackman would give the room when a take was ruined by laughter. It was not angry. It was something more unsettling. The look of a man who fundamentally did not understand why everyone around him was behaving this way and was too professional to say so out loud. And here is the extraordinary thing. The scene is perfect. Whatever tension existed between their approaches dissolved entirely on screen. Hackman's absolute commitment to playing the role straight, his refusal to wink at the camera, his total sincerity in the face of complete absurdity, is precisely what makes the scene so funny. Two very different philosophies about comedy produced one of the clearest examples of why committed straight performance is the beating heart of great farce. They never worked together again, and it made sense. But Mel has never stopped acknowledging what that one visit produced. Some collaborations are not meant to be repeated. They are meant to leave something behind. Cloris Leachman was relentless. That is the word Mel Brooks has returned to again and again when describing what it was like to direct her. Not difficult, not demanding, relentless. She brought an absolute, unbreakable commitment to understanding every dimension of every character she played, and she expected the people around her to match that commitment or get out of the way. They worked together on Young Frankenstein, High Anxiety, and History of the World Part 1. Each time, Cloris delivered something remarkable. Her Frau Blucher in Young Frankenstein became iconic. The thunderous introduction, the horses reacting to her name, the strange fierce loyalty of the character. It is one of the great comic performances in American film. Getting there, according to Mel, required more energy than most of his other productions combined. Cloris had her own vision for every character she played, and it wasn't a stubbornness born of insecurity or a need to be right. It was the vision of an actress who had thought deeply about who this person was and what she needed to be. When her vision conflicted with Mel's, which was often, she did not back down. She did not raise her voice or create scenes. She simply made her case again and again, with the tireless patience of someone who knew she was right and was willing to wait until the other person figured it out. Mel described their arguments as feeling like philosophical debates rather than creative disagreements. Cloris wanted to understand the emotional truth of a scene before she performed it. She needed to know what her character was feeling, what she wanted, what she feared, and what she had lost before the story even began. Mel, working at his preferred pace on a tight production schedule, did not always have time for this depth of excavation. What made working with Cloris genuinely exhausting was not the conflict itself, it was the sheer density of her attention. She missed nothing. Every choice had to be justified. Every line had to be earned. She would ask about a gesture, a look, a pause, and she would not be satisfied with a casual answer. She would wait, with those extraordinary eyes, until she received a real one. Mel said she was the only actress who ever made him feel like a student in his own classroom. He kept casting her anyway. He saw what she gave the screen. A depth and commitment that elevated every scene she was in, a truthfulness that made even the most absurd moments feel real. He hated the process. He loved the results. And somewhere inside that contradiction, he respected Cloris Leachman more than he could comfortably admit while they were still arguing about the subtext of a single line. The story of Richard Pryor and Mel Brooks is one of the great what-if stories in Hollywood comedy. It is the story of a collaboration that was only partially realized, a vision that was compromised before it could be completed, and a friendship that survived all of it, though not without a certain lasting sadness. Richard Pryor co-wrote Blazing Saddles. He sat in the writing room with Mel and a group of other writers, and he brought something to those sessions that no one else could have provided. He understood, from the inside, what it meant to be black in America. He understood the specific layered absurdity of racism in a way that could not be approximated. And he could translate that understanding into comedy that was sharp and devastating and gloriously funny all at the same time. His fingerprints are all over Blazing Saddles, in the boldness of the humor, in the willingness to say things that other comedies of the era were afraid to say, in the film's refusal to pretend its subject was anything other than what it was. Mel wanted Richard to play Bart, the black sheriff, at the center of the story. The role was in many respects written with Richard's particular energy in mind, that combination of cool intelligence and barely contained feeling, the way he could make you laugh and make you feel the pain underneath the laughter simultaneously. Mel believed, and has continued to believe, that Richard Pryor in that role would have produced something extraordinary. The studio said no. Their reasons were practical and from a business perspective not entirely unreasonable. Richard at that time in his life was unpredictable. He struggled with personal problems that affected his reliability. He was brilliant when he showed up and when he was present, but counting on him to show up and be present every day of a film shoot was a risk the studio was not willing to take. Mel fought the decision hard. He argued that Richard's specific quality was irreplaceable, that the film was built around the kind of energy and perspective only he could provide. The studio held firm. And Mel, who understood the financial realities of filmmaking even when they broke his heart, eventually accepted it. Cleavon Little was cast in the role and delivered a genuinely wonderful performance, charming and quick, with an effortless dignity that made the film's central premise work beautifully. But Mel has never pretended that this was his first choice, or that the situation didn't cost the film something. During the writing process, Richard was magnificent but mercurial. He could arrive one day full of ideas, crackling with energy, generating material faster than anyone could write it down. The next day he might not appear at all. Mel described working with him as one of the most electric and unstable experiences of his professional life. You never knew which Richard was coming through the door. When it was the brilliant one, there was no one better in the room. When it wasn't, there was nothing to do but wait. Mel has spoken about Richard with a tenderness that goes beyond professional respect. He saw in him not just a comic genius but a human being in genuine pain, someone who was fighting battles that had nothing to do with Hollywood. His so-called hatred of working with Richard was really the grief of watching someone extraordinary struggle to let his gifts fully out into the world. The last name on Mel Brooks' list is the one that tells you everything you need to know about what this list actually is. The actor he says he hated working with most, the one who gave him more headaches and more moments of complete professional bewilderment than anyone else, was his wife, Anne Bancroft, his partner of more than 40 years. The woman he called, without any hesitation or qualification, the greatest person he ever knew. They worked together on To Be or Not to Be, the 1983 remake of Ernst Lubitsch's wartime comedy. Mel produced and starred in the film alongside Anne, who played the lead female role. It was their one major collaboration as co-stars, and by Mel's account, it was the most challenging professional experience of his career. Not because Anne lacked talent. She was one of the finest actresses of her generation, a woman who had won an Oscar for The Miracle Worker and who brought an intelligence and emotional precision to everything she did. The problem was exactly that talent, combined with the fact that she had absolutely no interest in treating Mel as anything other than her equal, regardless of what it said on his director's chair. On other sets, with other actors, Mel was the director. His word, while often challenged and debated, ultimately carried a certain authority. People pushed back, but they also eventually deferred. And did not defer. And had her own understanding of every scene, her own vision for her character, her own ideas about what was working and what wasn't, and she made all of this known with the same directness and certainty that had made her one of the most formidable presences in the acting world. The fact that Mel was directing did not mean, in Anne's view, that he was necessarily right. She questioned his direction in the moment. She challenged his choices in front of the crew. When he asked for something that did not make sense to her, she would look at him with that famous steady gaze, patient, entirely unconvinced, and wait for a better answer. Mel said she was the only person on any set he had ever been genuinely afraid of. Not because she was unkind, but because she was so sharp and so committed to the truth of the work that he knew he could not get away with anything less than his absolute best. Their arguments during production were intense, though rarely loud. They were the arguments of two people who knew each other completely and had no reason to perform politeness, and would say what she thought. Mel would defend his position. And would wait. Mel would reconsider. Sometimes he held his ground. Often he didn't. And the scenes that resulted from these battles were frequently the strongest in the film, charged with something that no amount of smooth and agreeable collaboration could have produced. When they left the studio at the end of the day, the arguments stayed behind. Mel has spoken about this many times, the way their professional life and their personal life remained genuinely separate, the way they could disagree bitterly about a scene at 4 in the afternoon and be laughing together over dinner at 7. Their marriage was, by all accounts, one of the great ones. Full of argument and laughter and genuine, lasting respect. The same qualities that made Anne difficult to direct were the qualities that made her extraordinary as a human being. Her refusal to accept less than the truth. Her unwillingness to pretend something worked when it didn't. Her absolute, unshakable standards. 6 names. 6 stories. 6 people who drove Mel Brooks to distraction, who tested his patience and challenged his authority and made his working life harder than it needed to be. And 6 people who, each in their own particular way, made the films better. Made Mel better. Made the work that came out of those chaotic, difficult, argument-filled days into something that has lasted for generations. At 98, Mel Brooks has the clarity that comes from having truly lived. He has made enough films and buried enough friends and shared enough decades with the people he loved to know the difference between what mattered and what didn't. When he looks back at the actors he hated, he is really looking back at the people who loved the work as much as he did, who cared enough to fight, to push, to refuse, to demand. The easiest people to work with are not always the ones who make you greatest. Sometimes the greatest work comes from the greatest friction. Sometimes the people who make you want to tear your hair out are the same people who make you prouder than you ever expected to be. Mel Brooks knows this. He has always known it. And that is why, at 98, the hatred in his voice sounds so much like gratitude.